Even though in the style of piano that I teach, we don't read traditional grand staff notation, it's still helpful to have some understanding. In this quick video, we're going to talk about 3 reasons it's good to know how to understand grand staff notation, and I'm going to do it with a special guest, my good friend Robert Estrin from livingpianos.com. You know what? I'm pretty excited about this video today because I'm going to bring in a guest of mine, a good colleague and friend that I've known for years through the music industry. His name is Robert Estrin. Robert actually comes from a great traditional classical background. He's a concert pianist. He's the owner of Living Pianos. It's the first online piano store. He also does a lot of videos like this on YouTube. I think he told me he's had over 11 million views on YouTube at livingpianos.com. Is his website. So I'd like to bring in Robert Estrin.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks so much, Scott, for letting me join you today.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do, gang, is, and the reason I wanted Robert to join us, and he and I are doing a little series of these back and forth to really talk about the difference, and he and I both get questions from opposite sides all the time about, well, gee, Scott, you always talk about playing from chords and reading from lead sheets, and you know, Robert's side says, gee, I'm a classical piano player, I've had nothing but traditional classical lessons, you know, what about that strange voodoo world of jazz and you know, all the other things, right? And so the reality is, and I think we've both shouted it from the mountaintops from day one, is that there's nothing better or worse about either side or either world. They're very different, but there's huge advantages, you know, to knowing and to experiencing both sides, I think. So that's what I wanted to explore a little, and no one better to explore it with than an expert in not only pianos and one of the foremost, you know, biggest knowledge people I've ever known about the physical characteristics of the piano, but he's also a great classical piano player. So anyway, Robert, the first thing I want to talk about is we're going to talk about 3 reasons that it is helpful, even if you do nothing but play in the styles that I espouse all the time, in the piano and a flash stuff and reading from lead sheets. 3 reasons why it really is, it's a good thing to understand and learn how to read the grand staff. Now, the first one is, I think, a pretty it's kind of obvious, but at the same time, I think it's important, and that is to be able to learn some classical pieces if that's something you'd like to do, right?
Absolutely. You know, I know some people who painstakingly learn pieces on YouTube videos that it's almost like Guitar Hero, where you see the dots dropping and you hit the keys of the right ones or they light up. And, you know, all the power to people who can actually learn music that way. But it's important to understand that a musical score is much more than that. Think of it this way, analogy is a play or a screenplay. It's not just the words, it's the direction, the mood, the lighting, the costuming. There's so much that makes a play come to life or a motion picture. The same thing with a musical score. Do you know that there's more than just the notes and the timing? There's the nuance of expression, not just the louds and the softs. Sometimes there'll be words describing the mood, you know, agitated or getting softer and suddenly surprised. And there's all sorts of things in the score that are intrinsic to the value that bring it to life other than the notes. The other thing is a lot of classical scores are incredibly complex, and to try to figure it out with anything other than the musical score is so difficult. You know, trying to, for example, learn even a piece of Mozart, much less Beethoven, Chopin, or Liszt by ear, good luck with that. You know, it's so complicated that the score just gives you a handle on it. And at first you might think, oh man, it's so hard. Just like anything else, the first time you try to read English, of course, you have to sound at each letter, but before you know it, you're reading words, and it's the same thing with music, and well worth the effort. That will help you no matter what style of music you play.
Yeah, agreed. And those are all very good points. And I think that's a great segue into this second point I want to make, a really hands-on, you know, practical reason, pragmatic reason maybe, to get your reading, you know, together a little bit. Even if you say, well, I'm never going to play classical tunes, the reality is, even in a lot of non-classical genres, there are times when you're doing nothing but playing chords and kind of playing background, or you're accompanying someone. But there are also a few tunes, particularly piano-based tunes, or tunes that are really written by piano players, that there are some what I like to call signature licks that really, even though you knew the chord changes to it, if you don't play really what that signature lick is, you really, the people won't really want to be listening to. I mean, one example that comes to mind is a tune called "A 100 Years," and there's like a lick at the beginning that goes, right, whatever it is, that kind of thing. And there are, you think of some old Billy Joel things, you think of some old Elton John licks, and the reality is that it really will save you some time, if you become a decent reader, to be able to just find those and get them, and then you can kind of break in and out of, hey, here's a signature lick I have to play, versus the rest of the tune will do kind of what we more traditionally do when we're reading lead sheets. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the whole sight reading thing, it took me a long time to get good at sight reading. Even when I was playing advanced music, Beethoven sonatas, Chopin ballades and such, my reading was on a really elementary level. And it's kind of like a catch-22, because the only way to become a good sight reader is to read a lot. But it's painstaking to read music when you're bad at it, so I just never did it as a kid. Eventually I did get into it, and then it's just a total joy, because you can explore all kinds of new music without having to painstakingly learn it. You can just kind of read through it to see what you like. And then, as you said, if you're playing a popular piece, maybe a Billy Joel tune, and you want to get the riffs just the way they're supposed to be, and instead of listening to it and trying to, piece it out by ear, it can save you vast amounts of time, which is actually the next point we're going to get to. But sight reading also is something that's invaluable playing with other musicians. Because after all, like if a singer comes, oh, I'd love to sing this, can you play the piano part? Well, if you had to say, well, yeah, give me the CD, or let me get this on my iTunes, we'll meet up again in next month. Otherwise, they just give you the music, and boom, you can just do it right there. And it's a tremendously rewarding thing, not just for yourself, but for other musicians to take advantage of your skills in sight reading.
Now, let's flesh that out just a little bit too, Robert, if you would. In the case of someone handing you a piece of sheet music like that, like a singer came up and said it, and it was a tune you didn't know at all, would you be trying to read that thing verbatim, or would you be reading the chord changes from that? Because I'd be concerned about it sounding a little, stilted, if you will.
It depends what it is. Now, if it's a piece of sheet music and the part, as we discussed in a previous video, was written with all the melody notes, hey, that's not going to work. And sometimes I'll read the chord symbols, sometimes I'll read the notes and just change it to make it sound good. But other times, there might be something that is like a piece that's by Leonard Bernstein, where every note really just works because it's written, it's composed music, or a Schubert aria. You don't want to jam on that because, hey, every note is crafted so beautifully. You really want to play what's written to the best of your ability. Now, the thing about sight reading on the piano is there's so many notes on there that sometimes you have to kind of feel your way and get as many of the notes and the feel of the music where you might not be able to play perfectly, but you can kind of get the feel of it. And here's the big surprise that I found early on in my reading when I just started to get decent at it, is that players really appreciate you playing, even if you're not playing perfectly, because if you're a trombonist or a clarinetist or a singer or a violinist, they're always looking for a pianist to play with because they're playing solo music that isn't complete without the piano part. And as long as you keep with their timing and the nuance and the balance, even if you're not getting every note in the score, but you keep it moving and keep the mood, they are so grateful. And it's enriching to be able to do that, to play with other musicians, as well as to play solo music that maybe you don't have the time to learn, but you can enjoy reading through a variety of music. So it's a great thing. And for those of you out there who are not good at reading, just try to play with other musicians. That's what did it for me, because it's almost impossible to keep going when you're by yourself and you mess up. You want to go back and correct it. But when you're playing with somebody else, you just got to keep moving. And that's the secret of sight reading. Keep your eyes moving, keep your hands moving, and over time, you'll get more and more of the notes.
Hot tip and good advice. Now, to lead to the one last topic on this, and this is kind of a kissing cousin to this, but I've also found that it's very helpful in times when you are reading. Sometimes you're presented with something, and again, I'm talking about non-classical genres here. You're presented with something that is just traditional, like a piano, vocal, guitar type of sheet music, and it doesn't have any chord symbols in it. So you're really trying not to sound kind of hokey and play, some kind of an arrangement. And you want to know the chord symbols, but they're not there. Having the ability to read a little bit, and particularly in the bass clef, to be able to read, typically an arranger's left hand part kind of arpeggiates over a chord, or it'll do something that very easily identifies what the chord changes really are just by what notes you're playing. And I know that's a little bit more advanced for most people probably watching this video, but that's another point I was going to make, is that it can really help you figure out the chord changes to a tune if none are available by kind of looking at the written notation if it's all there and that's all you have, and kind of parsing out what chords are being spelled out by the written notation.
That's a great point. As a matter of fact, if you're kind of somewhat new to reading lead sheets and you look at those chord symbols and maybe you'll see D and well, that's easy, or D7, you can handle that. But here's the thing. You might have something like D13 sharp 11. You go, what the heck is that?
Right.
And you try to play it. It doesn't even make any sense. But you go to the sheet music, go, oh, now I get it. It can be tremendous in that regard. Now I'm going to tell you personally, back in the 80s, I got the synthesizer bug in a big way. The technology was exploding, and I put together, a computer music system and all that, and I just absolutely fell in love with the possibilities. And to support my habit, I played in all kinds of bands. For the first time in my life, I was playing in rock bands, country bands, whatever, anybody would have me, and I was gigging everywhere. Now, here's what would happen typically. Most bands, most of the people didn't read music. Now, I did have some where everybody read the music, and here was the difference. You go to a band that nobody reads music, and back then they'd hand out cassette tapes to everybody. Then everybody would go home, and a week or two later or more, you come back and people would be struggling trying to play through things. I would just take the set list and I'd transcribe it and write out the lead sheets and essential melody lines or certain riffs or motifs. And I could come into after the next rehearsal, even if it was just a few days later, I could have a 40-song set ready to go on stage because boom, being able to read that lead sheet, man, being able to craft it and read it. And when I finally got to play with some bands where everybody read, it was like then we were doing Genesis and more complex music, and everybody could just handle it, and it was a huge time saver.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing the connection really between lead sheets and/or written notation. I think that's what we're kind of delving into in these conversations. So listen,
exactly.
Robert, I really appreciate your insights on that. This is fun to quack about this a little bit. And for everyone watching again, please check out Robert's site at livingpianos.com. We'll put links down in the description for all the contact information and whatnot. But Robert, I appreciate your time. Let's continue this.
You got it, Scott. It's a real pleasure, and there'll be more of these coming. So thanks everybody for joining us.
All right. Thanks, gang. We'll see you in the next video.